Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious, Redditors. What's the worst thing you've ever had to experience? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My best friend was murdered when I was a kid. He had a twin sister. We were like three amigos. After he was killed, I fell into a deep depression and started having sleep paralysis. Killer was caught and felt zero remorse at trial. I wanted to kill the guy. His sister and me never recovered our friendship. Living through my best friend's suicide. I'm no stranger to death, and I've lost a lot of friends along the way, but suicide is different. Something about it makes it so much worse, and all you can do is blame yourself and hate yourself for not noticing the signs in time. It'll be 3 years in August, and I still break down regularly. It's changed me as a person completely, and part of me died that day. I'll never get over it, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to understand it. I was on a fire department for a few years after high school. A decapitated 3-year-old at a car accident, dad through the windshield basically eviscerated, and the mother with barely a scratch but screaming bloody murder. It broke me, and I quit a few weeks later. In 2016, I had a tooth removed in the back of my mouth and the hole got infected, causing an abscess that pushed my teeth apart. When I went to the hospital, they told me if I had waited a few more days, it would have split my face and broken my jaw. My mom having to tell my grandfather, who had advanced Alzheimer's, that his wife of 50+ years had died a few months before, over and over again. The look of heartbreak and sadness on his face every time he came to the realization that my grandmother was gone makes me well up typing this. F Alzheimer's. I'm glad they're both in a better place at this point. When I was 14, I was diagnosed with lymphoma. I remember the instant my parents told me at the kitchen table, and all my thoughts flooded to all the great things in life that I would miss if I died. Learning to drive, getting married, having kids, etc. It was absolutely horrifying. I had 4 really intense rounds of chemo that made my entire body hurt inside and out. Bone pain, muscle pain, stomach pain, and all the works. The effed up part about it is, I truly don't remember a lot from the experience. It's almost as if my mind wiped all the bad memories that I endured. All I know is that as soon as I would come home from the hospital each day, I would just lay down and do nothing because I had no energy to do anything else. All that being said, I did beat cancer, and I consider it to be the greatest achievement of my life. 2 months ago, I just hit 5 years in remission, and I know I couldn't have done it without the support of my family and friends. So if there's anyone out there reading this and fighting the fight, you got this. Great job. Thank you for sharing your experience and congrats on remission. May it always stay that way. Good luck. Not the worst thing ever, but when I was young, I heard my parents fight a lot. Grew up with a lot of shouting, and my dad was usually the instigator. I think one of the more vivid memories I can remember, I was maybe 5 or 6 at the time and it was late. My dad was annoyed with our pup and he just tossed her aside, which she made a loud noise at. My mom was shocked, then made it vocal but instantly got quiet. A little after that, my uncle, my mom's brother, and I were playing the Wii together and my parents were in their room. Then I just heard screaming and shouting and lots of crashing noises. My uncle grabbed me immediately and took me to my room and tried to put me to bed ASAP, but before I was asleep, it started getting worse. So he got up and made sure all the lights were off and just sat with me, holding me until it was over. I remember he was really tense, which I now understand. I don't think I'll ever forget that feeling of just lying in bed in the dark and hearing only screaming and shouting and barking. It was like it was bouncing off the walls. The next morning, my house was more quiet than normal. At the time, I was a kid, so I was oblivious to the bruises and the abuse, but as I got older, I learned the truth, and it has stuck with me since, and it got worse when I found out it was ongoing throughout my mom's pregnancies. I was lucky though. My parents never laid a hand on me or my brother. My dad has since done a complete 180 after we left him, and he hasn't raised a hand to anyone in almost 10 years. My mom's still going strong, and you'd never be able to guess what she went through by looking at her now, but those nights will always stick by me. TL, DR, grew up in an abusive household that was thankfully never targeted at me. Things are much better now. A few years ago, my brother had a major medication-induced manic episode. He became impulsive, belligerent, surly, mean. I love my brother dearly, but within days I was afraid of him. I thought the change might be permanent, that I had lost him. It was like some vicious stranger had invaded our home. He eventually slowly recovered, proceeded to have what I'd probably call PTSD from the experiences for years. He'd suddenly remember things he had said or done during the episode and just start crying. He's moved on, gotten a lot better and more stable. It was a terrible, frightening experience. As a teenager, I had a tooth that wasn't coming in fully. To fix this, a dental surgeon had to cut my gums open, attach a chain to the tooth which connects to another tooth, then naturally the tooth will come out. Don't ask me how. Here comes the pain. I sit down in the chair and the dental surgeon tells me what they are going to do, while they inject Novocaine into my gums. I kid you not, the minute the needle left my mouth, the surgeon cuts into my gums. I have 100% feeling in my mouth, and the assistant to the surgeon notices me in major amounts of pain. I begin sweating, and I'm trying to signal to them to stop and wait. The assistant grabs my hand thinking I'm some teenage boy who's afraid of what is happening. She just keeps telling me how I'm doing great and it'll be over soon. The Novocaine finally kicked in about 2 minutes before it was over. Being the fool I am, I didn't say anything and should have reported that to someone, as I assume I was not the first who went through 20 minutes of my mouth being cut open with no pain relief. Finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor. She went to the hospital with suspected food poisoning after having passed out at work. They admitted her and she stayed there for half a day before being sent home with what they concluded was good poisoning. I visited her at the hospital and spoke with her on the phone the day after. On the third day, she didn't pick up the phone. I went to her apartment and found her dead. She was 66 years old and I was 26 years old. She had no previous conditions. Autopsy concluded that she had been hemorrhaging in her intestines, resulting in the stomach pain and suspected food poisoning, but no further conclusion was made. She got up during the night to get a glass of water. She must have passed out due to blood loss. At least I hope that she did, and that she wasn't conscious. Being diagnosed with cancer and going through chemotherapy during this coronavirus pandemic, I'm young and was healthy and extremely active before all this. I never got sick. The cancer was tough enough, but now I can't even see my friends or family who kept my spirits up, and I can't do the sports I love that kept me sane because they've either been closed, skiing, or are too crowded and too risky, biking. It's the most isolating feeling in the world and depressing. I'm terrified I won't make it out of this mentally the same, if at all. Each chemo decimates my immune system. Even a regular cut that gets infected could be life-threatening. Not entirely the worst thing that ever happened to me, more so just scary. I have a memory of when I was about 7 to 8ish, I think, and I was home alone. Parent went to the store. It was nighttime, and this girl came to our apartment. We had a glass door since our apartment was technically a studio office. The girl was covered in blood, shaking, and looked absolutely terrified. She asked if she could come in and wash herself off. I let her in, which was insanely risky, but I was young and concerned. She cleaned up quietly and left. It was all really fast. Don't think I ever told my parents at the time. Still to this day, I have no idea if this even happened because it's so crazy. But the memory is very vivid. I very well remember what she looked like, and I can't imagine I would have dreamt something like that at that age. I have a few other weird memories from childhood that I'm unsure of too, but I guess I'll never know. My stepmother died unexpectedly last November. The night before, I was out partying with my friends, and 2 days after that, I had to see my father, one of the strongest persons I know, laying down on her coffin completely broken down, crying and screaming. Why? Why you? You did everything good. Yeah, that sucked. 5th grade. Had a parasite for 9 months. Didn't know I had it or what it was, but it was just awful. I skipped nearly that entire school year. I didn't eat anything except an applesauce every other day or so. Barely any water. Always had an upset stomach, but nothing to throw up. So I often threw up bile, which made my throat and mouth feel all burnt. I didn't do anything but puke and try to sleep. Didn't talk. Didn't watch TV. Nothing like that. It hurt way too damn much. What's worse was my dad had this bastard for 3 years. He's the type to suffer in silence though, and he kept going to work. He lost 30 pounds in those 3 years. If I hadn't caught that nasty thing, whatever it was, he would have had it for many more years, most likely. Not nearly as bad as many of the others here, but for me it was probably when I dislocated my shoulder while lifting. I was trying to incline bench and stupidly try to lift the bar up from kinda behind my head. My right shoulder just made a suction-y noise and just dropped. I immediately dropped the bar back into the hooks, and after a moment my shoulder slid and popped back into place. Ultimately, things ended up being fine without any medical care. My shoulder felt pretty horrible for a couple weeks, but I could still move it all around, and today it works just as well as the other one. Still, it was pretty sickening sensation. Though not always as dangerous and definitely not as life-threatening as some other things here, the sound of a shoulder coming out of its socket is really unique. Also, I've seen them put back in. Weird stuff. Getting drugged and raped. I still don't remember everything a couple years later, but I remember laying under him and asking him to stop because I was tired, but my body couldn't move an inch. It almost felt like an out-of-body experience. I just kept fading in and out of consciousness while it happened and just praying for it to stop the next time I opened my eyes. And the worst was when towards the end, his friends were watching us, and I remember looking towards them and begging for help, but they were recording it instead. I still haven't processed it fully, and I don't know if I ever will. Currently going through homelessness, very little money for food, especially living here in a northern state. Out of the middle of nowhere, it gets really cold at night. I don't know where my next meal will come from. It's even worse right now because hardly any warm places are open due to the coronavirus. I actually broke down and cried as a grown man yesterday because I was so scared. I wouldn't wish homelessness on my worst enemy. I'm so glad I still have my phone with internet. It's literally the only thing currently keeping me sane. I've had to watch 3 women who I love to bits die in front of me. About 10 years ago, I had to make the decision to switch off my mother's ventilator as we lost her to sepsis caused by an infected gallbladder. It all happened very quickly, and I had PTSD as a result of that for years. Spent a long time just wishing I was dead. 5 years ago, I witnessed my mother-in-law die as a result of cancer. It really broke my wife. She became sick, and I lost her to cancer as well last year. I held her hand too as she slipped away. I now sit in the ruins of a life, trying to cope with the overwhelming grief of it all. Thankfully, I beat my depression despite all the shit, so I'm not suicidal, but I have no idea how to make a worthwhile life after all this loss. My little brother's suicide. The little effer asked me where to find a rope supposedly for a YouTube channel project he made with some friends. He did some beforehand building little tree houses, so it didn't trigger me. Had to plan the funeral since our mom is a bipolar and went batshit crazy, and our abusive dad fell into an alcohol the very day I had to tell him the news. Had to talk in front of everyone the day he was buried because my mom and dad just couldn't. Trying not to fall apart, nor blame anyone to avoid this to hit our parents harder than it already did. He was 18. I was 21. I work in construction. Last summer, the railing to the break wall blew completely off and all the rebar snapped. But there were still pieces of rebar stuck into the railing, which had flipped over, so the rebar was exposed. We were trying to cut the rebar so nobody got hurt. A coworker fell onto one of these pieces of rebar that we hadn't cut, and it stuck through his leg and came out the other side. I can't imagine what kind of pain he was in. I was the closest to him, so I had to try and help him up. It was so disgusting. Yeah. Last year, I was in my final semester of my engineering degree. I was doing well in a class I absolutely needed to pass. I had my second midterm approaching, so I had a huge amount of anxiety building. My dog died, very suddenly. I saw her Tuesday at my parents' house. She was normal. She died Wednesday in my dad's arms. I cried in front of everyone in my class when I got the text. Thursday, my indoor cat that lived with me in my apartment got super sick. She couldn't stop vomiting, and stopped drinking water or eating food, stopped moving around. Vet could only give her a bolus of water, since they closed over the weekend. My fiance was out of town for the weekend for her student teaching requirements, so I was completely alone. I had to study for my test on Monday, so I actually had to ignore the cat for some time. I felt like a piece of shit. Then, because my cat was so messed up, we had to bail on going to our first IndyCar race on Sunday. We paid $600 for the tickets, non-refundable. I was a mess by Monday. My professor gave me 2 extra days to take the test. I still failed harder than any test I took before. My cat was in real bad shape, and the vet had no idea what was happening. They even performed surgery in hopes of finding a blockage that wasn't showing on their scans. They found nothing. Nothing in her blood tests. I cried in the lobby of the vet. $1,800 total for no real results in helping my cat. She's still vomiting multiple times a day and not drinking water. Still, alone because my family lives an hour away and my fiance does her student teaching during the week out of town. I cried every single day, hard and uncontrollably. I would hold my cat and cry because I knew she was going to die. I was tempted to kill myself by jumping off my balcony, but I started forcing my cat to drink water with her medication syringe. I'd hold her head and squirt water in her mouth. She was too weak to resist. I'd cry every time. She started to keep the water down every other time. Then it was every 3 times. Then it was only a few times she'd vomit up the water. Then she started eating again, and she'd vomit a lot less. Then she got her strength back. She eventually pulled through and returned to normal in a month. I was able to reach an agreement with my professor, and I was able to pass my class, barely. I got my degree. But those 3 weeks were the most overwhelming and lonely days of my life. I wanted to die every day. I had half my left leg removed due to a massive fungal infection. The operation went fine, and I woke up and I was groggy but okay. Then about 12 hours later, the pain block wore off or something. I was still on massive painkillers, but the new pain was so intense I was begging and begging them to help me. That was so horrible. 5 days later, they were about to discharge me, but my potassium level was too low, so the nurses gave me a large potassium drip and it made my arm feel like it was on fire. I was still on massive oral painkillers, but it felt like my arm was being cooked. Eventually, they packed my arm in ice and it was tolerable. Mind you, I walked into the hospital feeling absolutely fine. The fungal lesion they had originally thought was cancer and later turned out to be a fungus was both very large and found completely by accident. It took me 2 months to return to work part-time and 6 months before I actually felt better. I was playing football when I broke my leg. Some guy fell and his helmet snapped my medial malleus right off. For those who don't know what that is, it's the knob on the inside of your ankle. So I was out sitting on the trainer's table when I had to go to the bathroom. So I took crutches and went over there. About 3/4 of the way there, I slipped on the walkway, protecting the track from cleats, and landed full force on my foot. It hurt so bad. I was lucky to have my mouth guard in to bite down on. I screamed internally because I could even open my mouth. I don't know if you took it under your own volition to use the crutches alone, but you should have had a teammate or a coach or a staff member, someone to help you. I'm sorry that happened. Had my right foot amputated, known as BKA, below knee amputation. We call it a baloney. Had very little actual amputation site pain, but the phantom pain is intense and frustrating. The first couple of weeks had felt like muscle cramps in the arch of Achilles tendon, then cramping in the top of the foot. No way to relieve the pain, nowhere to rub, just grit your teeth through it. It was about 18 months ago, and the cramping has gone away, but I still get maybe 20 times a day the feeling that my toes are being crushed. Happens without warning, lasts 30 seconds, completely goes away. It is so intense, I just shut down until it passes. Takes my breath away. Being hospitalized age 11 after I'd contracted E. coli and was suffering kidney failure. I'd been getting really bad prior to it, but the out-of-hours doctor kept dismissing it as general stomach bug. Our GP sent my bloods for testing, and when they got the results, they phoned my parents telling them they needed to get me to a hospital that evening. Everything else happened pretty fast. At the hospital, they rushed me to the operating room to plug me to a dialysis machine. The next couple of weeks was a struggle between regular spontaneous vomiting and feeling so damn weak from not being able to keep any food down. Surprisingly got through it without any long-term damage to my kidneys. Left me with a bit of unresolved mental trauma, though, that I didn't deal with properly until I was an adult.